Hi, Gemini. Oh my goodness, guys. The energy coming through this reading feels incredibly strong. Honestly, I pulled your cards and had to sit with them for a moment because something about this connection feels very different, very honest, very emotional. It feels like someone has been carrying thoughts and feelings they haven't fully admitted, even to themselves. And now, something is shifting. I keep getting the sense that this person's starting to see this connection from a completely different perspective. Almost like they're finally understanding the value of something they once took for granted. So get comfortable, take a deep breath, and open your heart. Because what is showing up here feels less about fantasy and more about realization. And Gemini, I think this person has a lot more on their mind than you realize. Let's get into your reading. Okay, Gemini, let's get into this because the energy coming through right now is honestly making me pause for a second. I keep looking at these cards and, wow, there is so much reflection happening in this person's energy. It's almost like they're standing in front of their own memories and seeing everything differently than they did before. You know, sometimes people don't fully understand what they have while they're experiencing it. Sometimes they don't realize the value of a person until they step back and look at the bigger picture. And that's exactly what feels like it's happening here. I keep seeing the Six of Pentacles, and the moment I look at this card, I feel this person revisiting the past, not necessarily trying to change it, not necessarily trying to justify it, just looking at it, really looking at it. And honestly, I don't think they like everything they're seeing, because the more they reflect on this connection, the more they're becoming aware of something they may have overlooked before. They're recognizing how much energy Gemini poured into this relationship, how much patience was present, how much understanding was present, how much grace was present. I mean, this feels like someone realizing that certain acts of love were so consistent that they almost became invisible. Does that make sense? It's like when somebody is always there, always supporting, always showing up, always trying to understand. Eventually, you stop noticing how much they're actually giving. And wow, this person is beginning to notice. I keep hearing this quiet realization in their energy, something that sounds like, wait a minute, why didn't I see that before? Why didn't I appreciate that more? Because the truth is, Gemini, they are seeing things from a different angle now. And honestly, I don't feel like this realization is comfortable. The energy feels emotional. It feels humbling. It feels like somebody coming face to face with the reality that they may not have contributed equally to what was being built. And then we have the Justice card showing up. Okay, can I be honest? This card feels very loud in this reading. Not loud in a dramatic way. Loud in an emotional way, because what I'm sensing here is accountability. Not blame, not punishment, just accountability. This person's starting to understand their role in the imbalance. They're starting to acknowledge moments where they pulled away. Moments where they remained silent. Moments where they accepted your effort without fully recognizing its value. And that's interesting because I don't feel this awareness is coming from someone forcing them to look. I feel like it's coming from within. It's almost as if something inside them can no longer avoid the truth. They're looking at the scales. They're looking at what was given. They're looking at what was received. And for the first time, they may be seeing the difference clearly. I keep feeling this sense of regret, not panic, not desperation, just regret, the kind that arrives quietly, the kind that shows up when the noise settles down and someone finally has a moment alone with their thoughts. And honestly, that energy feels very present. Because this person is replaying things, conversations, choices, missed opportunities, moments where they could have shown up differently, moments where they could have expressed more, moments where they could have met Gemini halfway, and now those memories seem to carry a different weight. Wow, I wasn't expecting the emotional depth coming from this, because underneath everything else, I keep feeling gratitude trying to emerge, almost like this person is finally understanding what your presence meant, what your support meant, what your care meant. And here's the thing. The Two of Cups keeps pulling my attention back. Not because it's shouting. Actually, it's the opposite. It feels quiet, gentle, soft. Like a memory they keep returning to. I keep getting this image of someone sitting alone and thinking, there was something real there. There was something meaningful there. There was something I didn't fully understand at the time. And that's where the emotion starts building. Because the connection itself doesn't feel forgotten. It feels remembered. Maybe more clearly than ever before. This person seems to be recognizing that what existed between you wasn't something they could measure with logic alone. It affected them more deeply than they admitted, maybe even more deeply than they understood. And now that awareness is beginning to rise to the surface. Okay, this is really interesting, because I don't feel like this energy is about grand gestures right now. I don't feel like it's about dramatic actions. I feel like it's about realization. It's about awareness. It's about somebody sitting with the truth of what happened and finally allowing themselves to see it clearly. The good, the difficult, the beautiful, the unbalanced, all of it. And the more they sit with it, the harder it becomes to ignore what Gemini truly brought into their life. Honestly, this feels like the beginning of something happening inside them. A shift, a perspective change, a moment where old beliefs and old assumptions are starting to crack. Because as they're looking back at this connection, they're also starting to look at themselves. And wow, that deeper process feels like it's only just beginning. Something feels very different here. Honestly, the energy is getting deeper. I keep looking at these cards and wow, it's almost like I'm watching somebody wake up from a very long sleep. Not literally, emotionally, spiritually, internally. And the first card that immediately pulls my attention is the Judgment card. Okay, can I be honest? This doesn't feel comfortable for them. It feels necessary. There's a difference. Because what I'm sensing is someone hearing a truth they can no longer ignore. It's like certain feelings have been knocking at the door for a very long time, and they kept finding ways to stay busy, stay distracted, stay focused on everything except what was happening inside their own heart. But that strategy doesn't seem to be working anymore. I mean, the more I sit with this energy, the more I feel this person being pulled towards self-reflection. Not because somebody is forcing them, not because anybody is demanding answers. Something inside them is simply becoming louder. And wow, I keep getting this image of someone replaying memories they thought they had already moved past. Moments they thought were finished. Conversations they thought no longer mattered. Yet somehow those memories keep returning. Again and again and again. That's interesting because they're starting to ask themselves questions they never wanted to ask before. Questions like, why does this connection keep coming back into my mind? Why am I still thinking about this? Why does this person still affect me? And honestly, I don't think they have all the answers yet. But I do think they're becoming willing to ask the questions. That alone feels significant, because for a long time, I feel this person preferred certainty. Even if that certainty wasn't making them happy, at least it felt familiar. At least it felt safe. Then the tower appears. And wow, the atmosphere changes immediately. The moment I look at the tower, I feel old assumptions beginning to crack. Not all at once, not dramatically. More like someone realizing that a story they've been telling themselves no longer fits. Maybe they convinced themselves they didn't care as much as they did. Maybe they convinced themselves they could simply move on without looking back. Maybe they convinced themselves that feelings could be controlled through logic alone. But those beliefs don't seem stable anymore. I keep feeling pieces falling away, masks falling away, defenses falling away, excuses falling away, and honestly, I think that's why this energy feels so emotional. Because it's difficult when the things you've relied on for protection stop working. It's difficult when the walls you've built no longer keep the feelings out. You know, I keep hearing the phrase, I can't pretend anymore. Not necessarily spoken out loud, more like something their soul is whispering to them. And that's where this shift becomes powerful. Because this isn't only about Gemini, it's also about them. It's about who they've been. It's about how they've loved. It's about how they've protected themselves. It's about the ways they've avoided vulnerability. And little by little, those patterns are becoming visible. Wow, the more I sit with this energy, the more I feel somebody standing at the edge of a major personal transformation. Which brings me to the Death card. Okay, this card feels incredibly important here. Not because of what it's bringing, but because of what it's taking away. I keep sensing old versions of this person fading. Old fears, old habits, old ways of seeing relationships, old ways of seeing themselves. It's almost like they're shedding layers they didn't even realize they were carrying. And honestly, that process doesn't feel easy. Sometimes growth looks beautiful from the outside, but from the inside, it can feel confusing. It can feel emotional. It can feel like losing parts of yourself before you understand what's replacing them. And that's exactly what I'm picking up. This person feels caught between who they were and who they're becoming. They're no longer fully connected to the old version of themselves, but they're still discovering the new version. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, Gemini keeps appearing. Not necessarily because they're trying to force these thoughts. Not necessarily because they're searching for them every second, but because this connection seems tied to their awakening in ways they're only beginning to understand. The memories feel different now. The emotions feel different now. The perspective feels different now. And honestly, I think that's what surprises them the most. Because they're realizing that the person who once looked at this connection through one lens is no longer the same person looking at it today. Something has shifted. Something has opened. Something has changed. And as these old beliefs continue falling away, I can already feel another layer rising to the surface, a quieter layer, a more personal layer. Because beneath all this transformation, there are still words left unsaid. There are still thoughts they haven't shared. And the energy is beginning to move toward everything they've been keeping hidden inside. There's a heaviness showing up here. Not overwhelming, not dark, just persistent, like a thought that refuses to leave no matter how many times someone tries to push it away. And wow, the moment I look at the Nine of Swords, I feel that immediately. I keep getting this image of somebody trying to stay busy, trying to focus on work, trying to focus on responsibilities, trying to focus on other people. Yet somehow their mind keeps drifting back to Gemini, again and again and again. Honestly, I don't think they talk about this as much as they experience it. That's the interesting part. Because from the outside, they may appear composed. They may appear fine. They may even convince themselves they're moving forward. But internally, there's a completely different conversation happening. I mean, this person seems to spend a lot more time thinking about you than they would ever admit. Sometimes it happens intentionally. Sometimes it catches them off guard. A song, a memory, a place, a random moment in the middle of an ordinary day, and suddenly there you are, back in their thoughts, back in their heart, back in their awareness. Wow. It's almost like your energy has become woven into parts of their daily life without them realizing it. The harder they try to ignore certain feelings, the more noticeable those feelings become, and then the moon appears. Okay, this energy feels incredibly personal, because what I'm sensing here isn't only about what they know. It's about what they haven't fully admitted to themselves. The moon feels like hidden emotions moving beneath the surface, thoughts they don't always share, questions they don't always ask out loud. I keep feeling someone sitting quietly with emotions they don't fully understand, and honestly, that uncertainty seems to be creating a lot of reflection. Because there are moments when they think they've figured everything out. Then another memory appears, another feeling appears, another thought about Gemini appears, and suddenly they're questioning everything all over again. You know, I keep hearing, why can't I let this go? Not spoken with frustration, spoken with confusion. Because a part of them genuinely believed enough time would make these feelings disappear. Yet the opposite seems to be happening. The more time passes, the more they find themselves revisiting the connection. The more distance exists, the more they're trying to understand why your presence remains so strong within them. And wow, that realization feels emotional. Because I think they're beginning to understand that forgetting isn't as simple as they once imagined, especially when somebody has left a meaningful impression on your life, especially when there are still things left unsaid. Which brings me to the Page of Swords. Okay, this card immediately changes the atmosphere, because now I'm picking up curiosity, a lot of curiosity, more than they would probably ever admit. I keep feeling this person wondering about you, wondering how you're doing, wondering what your days look like, wondering who you're spending time with, wondering what has changed since they last felt close to you. It's not coming through as control, it's coming through as interest, the kind of interest people feel when somebody still matters to them. And honestly, I think that realization surprises them sometimes, because they keep discovering that they care more than they thought they did. I also feel words here, many words, thoughts, conversations, messages that never happened, feelings that never fully found their way into language. It's like there are entire chapters sitting inside this person that remain unread, things they wish they had explained, things they wish they had expressed differently, things they wish they had said when the opportunity was there. And now those unspoken thoughts seem to carry extra weight. I mean, the energy feels almost restless, like somebody rehearsing conversations in their mind, thinking about what they would say, thinking about how they would explain themselves, thinking about whether those words would even be understood. Because underneath all this curiosity, I keep sensing another feeling. Fear, not fear of the connection, fear of timing, fear of missed opportunities, fear that while they've been processing everything internally, life has continued moving forward, and honestly, that fear feels very real. There are moments where they wonder whether they waited too long to understand what they were feeling. Moments where they question whether the opportunity to express those feelings still exists in the same way. And that's where this energy becomes especially emotional. Because the more they think about Gemini, the more impossible it becomes to dismiss the significance of the connection. The more they try to move away from it mentally, the more it circles back into their awareness. Almost like their heart keeps bringing them back to something their mind hasn't completely sorted out yet. Wow, there's so much happening beneath the surface here. Questions, curiosity, memories, unspoken emotions. And the deeper they go into those thoughts, the more another energy begins to emerge. A softer energy, a more vulnerable energy. Because hidden underneath all this thinking is a growing desire to stop holding everything inside and finally acknowledge what they're truly feeling. There's a softness entering this energy now. Not weakness, not uncertainty, just honesty. And honestly, I think that's what makes this feel so powerful. Because for a long time, I get the sense that this person was more comfortable carrying their feelings privately than expressing them openly. They could think about them, analyze them, question them, even obsess over them at times. But actually speaking them, actually letting someone see what was happening inside. That feels like the part they've struggled with. And wow, the moment I look at the King of Cups, I feel somebody becoming emotionally mature in a way they weren't before. Not perfect, not suddenly transformed overnight, just more aware, more accountable, more connected to what they truly feel. I keep sensing somebody sitting with their emotions instead of running from them. That's a big difference. Because earlier, it felt like they were trying to understand what they were feeling. Now it feels like they're beginning to accept it. And those are two very different experiences. You know, understanding something is one thing. Accepting it is another. I keep hearing this quiet acknowledgement within them. Almost like they're saying, okay, I can't keep pretending this doesn't matter. I can't keep acting like this isn't affecting me. And wow, that realization feels incredibly emotional. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. Because once someone stops fighting their own feelings, they're forced to sit face to face with them. And that's exactly what I'm seeing. The King of Cups keeps appearing almost like a presence in the room. Calmer, more grounded, less reactive, less afraid. This person seems to be reaching a point where they no longer want every conversation to happen inside their own head. They don't want every emotion hidden behind silence. They don't want every truth locked away. Honestly, the energy feels tired of hiding, and then the Ace of Cups appears. Okay. This card immediately shifts the atmosphere. Everything feels more open, more vulnerable, more sincere. I keep sensing emotions that have been sitting beneath the surface for a very long time, finally wanting space to breathe. It's almost like their heart has been carrying words that never found a voice, thoughts that never found expression, feelings that never found a safe place to land. And now those feelings seem to be moving upward. I mean, there is so much they haven't said, more than Gemini probably realizes. There are explanations, confessions, reflections, moments of vulnerability they've kept tucked away. Not because they didn't exist, but because they didn't know how to share them. Or maybe they weren't ready. Wow. I keep getting the image of somebody rehearsing honesty, not rehearsing manipulation, not rehearsing excuses, honesty. The kind that feels uncomfortable because it requires vulnerability. The kind that asks a person to lower their defenses and simply tell the truth. And honestly, that seems to be where their energy is heading, because what I'm sensing now isn't somebody trying to protect an image. It's somebody becoming increasingly interested in being authentic. And that's where the High Priestess enters. The moment this card appears, everything becomes quieter, more intimate, more personal. I keep feeling hidden layers, not hidden because they're deceptive. Hidden because they've never been fully revealed. There seems to be an entire emotional world inside this person that Gemini has only seen pieces of. A deeper version. A more sensitive version, a more vulnerable version, and wow, I think they're becoming aware of that too. Because I keep hearing this feeling of, you haven't seen all of me, not in a negative way, not as a complaint, more like a realization. They're recognizing that much of who they truly are has remained behind closed doors, protected, guarded, unspoken, and now those walls don't seem as necessary as they once did. Honestly, I think that's one of the biggest shifts happening here. This person is becoming less interested in maintaining control and more interested in being understood. Not perfectly understood, just genuinely understood. The High Priestess feels like someone standing at the edge of a truth they've carried for a very long time. And little by little, they're becoming willing to reveal it. I keep feeling layers unfolding, not all at once, not dramatically, slowly, carefully, but intentionally. Because this isn't only about expressing feelings. It's also about showing someone who they really are underneath all the defenses. Underneath the uncertainty, underneath the fears, underneath the silence. Wow. The emotional maturity coming through this energy feels very different from what appeared earlier in the reading. There's more self-awareness now, more honesty, more willingness to acknowledge what's real. And the deeper they connect with those feelings, the more another shift begins to emerge. Because once somebody stops hiding from their heart, they naturally begin asking themselves an important question. What kind of life actually makes me happy? And that question feels like it's leading them toward an entirely new chapter of self-discovery. Something feels lighter here. Not because all the questions have disappeared. Not because every emotion has suddenly become simple. But because I can feel this person becoming more honest with themselves. And honestly, that's changing everything. The moment the Eight of Cups appears, I get this feeling of somebody looking around their life and quietly realizing that certain things no longer fit the person they're becoming. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just growing awareness, a growing understanding, a growing discomfort with staying exactly where they are. And wow, I think that's been a difficult realization for them. Because sometimes people outgrow things they once believed they needed. Old habits, old patterns, old ways of thinking, even environments that once felt familiar. I keep feeling this person standing in front of choices they've avoided for a very long time. Not because they didn't see them, because they weren't ready to see them. There's a difference. You know, the energy feels less focused on what everyone else wants and more focused on what actually feels true inside their own heart. And I have to be honest, that feels like a major shift. Because for so long, I get the sense that this person looked outside themselves for answers. Outside validation, outside opinions, outside expectations, outside approval. But none of those things seem as convincing anymore. The noise is getting quieter. The distractions are getting quieter. And what's left is something much harder to ignore. Their own feelings, their own truth, their own heart. Wow, I keep hearing this energy of, I can't keep doing things the same way. Not spoken from frustration, spoken from clarity. Because something inside them is beginning to understand that avoiding happiness isn't the same thing as protecting themselves. And that realization feels important. The Eight of Cups keeps showing me someone slowly walking away from what no longer feels aligned. Not because they're angry, not because they're trying to punish anyone, simply because they know they need something different, something more honest, something more meaningful. And then the Wheel of Fortune appears. Okay, the atmosphere changes again. I immediately feel movement. Not external movement, internal movement, perspective changing, priorities changing, values changing. I mean, the things that once felt important don't seem to hold the same power anymore. And that's interesting because I think this person is surprising themselves. They're beginning to care about different things, think about different things, want different things. It's almost like they're waking up and realizing they've been measuring happiness using standards that never truly belonged to them. Wow. That feels emotional because I keep sensing someone asking themselves a very simple question. What actually makes me happy? Not what looks successful, not what pleases everyone, not what feels safe, what genuinely makes me happy. And honestly, Gemini keeps appearing in that reflection, not as a fantasy, not as an escape, more like a meaningful part of the answer they're searching for. Because the more they connect with themselves, the more clearly they seem to understand the emotional significance of this connection. I keep feeling them looking at Gemini differently now, with less fear, less resistance, less confusion, and more appreciation, more understanding, more emotional honesty. And then we arrive at the Ten of Cups. Wow, this energy feels incredibly heartfelt, not because somebody is imagining perfection. Actually, it feels quite the opposite. It feels mature, grounded, real. I keep sensing this person allowing themselves to imagine what emotional fulfillment could actually look like, not based on old fears, not based on past disappointments, but based on who they're becoming today. And that's where Gemini keeps showing up. I don't feel them focusing on temporary emotions anymore. I feel them looking at the bigger picture, the emotional picture, the human picture, the connection itself. And honestly, that perspective feels very different from what appeared earlier in this reading. Because before, so much of their energy was spent trying to understand their feelings. Now it feels like they're beginning to trust them. That's a huge difference. The Ten of Cups feels like somebody opening their heart to possibilities they once kept at a distance, allowing themselves to believe that happiness deserves a place in their decision-making, allowing themselves to consider a future that feels emotionally meaningful rather than merely comfortable. And wow, the more I sit with this energy, the more I feel hope quietly entering the room. Not loud hope, not unrealistic hope, just the kind that appears when somebody stops running from themselves. The kind that appears when somebody finally starts listening to their heart instead of arguing with it. And that inner shift feels like it's preparing them for something even more tangible. Because all this emotional clarity is slowly leading toward action, toward choices, toward real-world movement. And I can already feel the energy beginning to gather around what they may want to build once they fully trust what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. Something is becoming much more tangible here. Not rushed, not impulsive, just intentional. And honestly, that's what stands out to me the most. Because throughout this reading, we've been moving through layers of reflection, awareness, emotion, and self-discovery. But the energy in front of me now feels different. It feels like somebody is getting tired of living entirely inside their own thoughts. They're getting tired of replaying scenarios, tired of analyzing every feeling, tired of standing at a distance and simply observing. And wow, the moment the chariot appears, I feel movement, real movement, not necessarily physical movement, at least not yet. What I'm sensing is a shift in mindset, a shift from thinking to deciding, a shift from wondering to choosing, and that's important. Because there comes a moment when a person realizes they can't stay in the same emotional space forever. Eventually, something inside them says, okay, I understand what I feel. Now what am I going to do about it? And honestly, that feels like the question they're sitting with. I keep seeing someone becoming more focused, more determined, less scattered by fear, less distracted by uncertainty. There's a growing sense that standing still no longer feels comfortable. The chariot feels like somebody gathering all the pieces of themselves and pointing them in the same direction. Their thoughts, their emotions, their intentions, their hopes. Everything slowly beginning to move together instead of pulling against itself. And wow, that feels like a major difference from where this energy started. Because earlier there was hesitation, there was confusion, there was resistance. Now I see somebody wanting clarity, wanting purpose, wanting momentum. And then the Ace of Pentacles appears. Okay. This card immediately changes the atmosphere. Everything feels more grounded, more practical, more real. Because this person doesn't seem interested in living inside fantasy anymore. They're not focused on what if. They're becoming more interested in what can actually be built, what can actually grow, what can actually have substance. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest realizations they've had. Because feelings are important, emotions matter, but what they're searching for now feels deeper than emotion alone. I keep sensing somebody asking themselves, what kind of foundation do I want in my life? What kind of connection feels meaningful? What deserves my energy? And every time those questions appear, Gemini appears right alongside them, not as an abstract idea, not as a distant memory, but as somebody connected to the future they're beginning to imagine. Wow. The Ace of Pentacles feels incredibly sincere, not flashy, not dramatic, just sincere. It's the energy of someone who wants something genuine, something they can nurture, something they can invest in emotionally, something they can show up for consistently. And honestly, that feels very different from avoidance, very different from fear, very different from running. Because what I'm sensing here is somebody becoming increasingly interested in creating stability rather than escaping uncertainty. And that shift feels important. The more they trust themselves, the more they seem to trust what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. And then we arrive at the Hierophant. Wow. This card carries such a calm energy. Everything suddenly feels more mature, more thoughtful, more intentional. I keep sensing somebody looking at relationships differently than they once did. Looking at commitment differently. Looking at emotional responsibility differently. Looking at what truly matters differently. And honestly, the Hierophant feels like somebody asking bigger questions now. Not how do I avoid getting hurt, but what kind of connection reflects who I am becoming? Not what feels easiest, but what feels meaningful. You know, that's a completely different mindset. And I think that's what makes this energy so powerful. Because this person doesn't seem focused on temporary emotions anymore. They're focused on alignment, on authenticity, on creating something that feels honest, something that feels steady, something that has room to grow over time. I keep feeling this deep respect emerging. Respect for their own feelings, respect for the lessons they've learned, respect for the connection itself. And wow, that respect seems to be changing everything. Because once somebody truly values something, they naturally begin approaching it differently, with more care, more intention, more awareness, more presence. Honestly, the energy feels ready for a new chapter, not because everything has been figured out, not because every answer has arrived, but because this person is no longer standing in the same place emotionally. They're seeing themselves differently. They're seeing Gemini differently. And they're seeing the possibilities in front of them through a much clearer lens. The journey we've been following throughout this reading feels like it has brought them to an important threshold, a place where reflection becomes understanding, where understanding becomes honesty, and where honesty begins shaping the choices they make moving forward. And wow, the most beautiful thing about this energy isn't what they're discovering about Gemini. It's what they're discovering about themselves along the way. And honestly, that's what feels most significant about this reading. Not the cards themselves, not the questions, not even the connection. It's the growth that has been unfolding beneath the surface all along. Because sometimes the most important moments aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet realizations, The moments when somebody finally sees things differently. The moments when somebody stops running from what their heart has been trying to tell them. And that's the energy that keeps lingering here for me. So whatever part of this reading resonated with you, take what feels meaningful and leave the rest. Trust your own wisdom, trust your own experience, and most importantly, be gentle with yourself along the way. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate every single one of you. If you enjoyed this reading and you'd like to spend more time together in future messages, I'd love to have you here. Until then, take good care of yourself, Gemini. Keep following what feels honest. Keep choosing what feels aligned. And remember, sometimes clarity arrives one small realization at a time. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next reading. Bye for now.